the WorldDAB and ASBU DAB Plus technical webinar series. Today is the first of 3 days. We have the 15th, 16th and 17th of September, covering quite a wide range of topics with some very interesting speakers from across the industry. So just a little bit of housekeeping first. We will be doing Q&A. The Q&A will be through the control panel feature. Please submit your questions and we will endeavour to get back to you. If we can't answer those questions live, we will endeavour to get back to you and publish answers to those questions after the series. We do have an extended Q&A session on the Thursday, so we might be able to use some of that time to get into some of those great questions I'm sure will be asked. So today, day one is DAB Plus overview and business case. Our speakers today are Dr. Adnan Salab from the Arab States Broadcasting Union, Patrick Hannon, President of WorldDAB, myself, Catherine Sable-Brown from Escom Technologies, and Lindsay Cornell from the BBC and Chair of the WorldDAB Technical Committee. So a very outstanding set of speakers. So I think without more to do, I will hand over to Dr. Adnan Salab, who's Head of Technical Training Department at the Arab States Broadcasting Union, to present his opening remarks and the status of DAB Plus in the Arab region. So over to you, Dr. Adnan. Please share your screen with the audience and unmute your microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Les. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Dear all, on behalf of the Arab State Broadcasting Union, ASBU, and of its Media Training Academy, I express to you our sincere greetings and most welcome. ASBU has the pleasure to cooperate with WorldDAB in conducting this series of webinars about DAB Plus for 3 successive days. And we are much more happy about the significant interest for participating, as we registered over 320 participants from many different countries at this workshop. My special thanks to WorldDAB and namely to its president, Mr. Patrick Hannon, for this long-lasting and fruitful cooperation, as we have been organizing for over 5 years with the cooperation also with both the AIBD and the ABU, this face-to-face symposium in Kuala Lumpur. I would also like to warmly greet the expert panelists at this online workshop, who will greatly ensure its success, and thank them for having accepted our invitation. Allow me please also to pay tribute to my colleagues at the WorldDAB and the noteworthy efforts that this team has made, led by Ms. Bernie and Dr. Les in this preparation and organization of the workshop in close coordination with ASBU Academy team. So I would like to shed the light on the situation of DAB in the Arab region. ASBU adopted the DAB Plus system years ago, and since then, ASBU worked towards ensuring its widespread implementation of the Arab region, and it's now witnessing a remarkable development in this field. In order to give you the picture about the WorldDAB situation, ASBU sent a questionnaire to its members in order to update the information about the status on FM and DAB Plus in the Arab world region. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the new information yet. So for this briefing, I'm going to use the information available from the last year. In the next slides, we can notice the development implementing DAB Plus in the Arab region. Of course, the information I had from last year were updated by information sent by Ms. Bernie from the world. Okay, so this is a map of the Arab region. As I said, the Arab State Broadcasting Union recommends DAB Plus 4 years ago. Now Algeria, they launched the trial in 2018 and going on 68% population coverage, planning underway to immigrate from FM to DAB+. Tunisia, regular DAB+ service launched in June 2019, 51% population coverage, 18 stations on air, aiming for FM switch off by 2025.
That's good.
Saudi Arabia, draft regulation put forward by Saudi Broadcasting Authority starting from January 2021. Radio receivers are required to include plus. Draft regulation applies to automotive, home, and portable receivers. Kuwait, regular DAB+ service launched in 2014, 100% population coverage, 16 DAB+ station on air. For United Emirates, trial since 2014, 1.8 population coverage, DAB+ receiver specification published. Bahrain trial since 2016 for services, 40% population coverage. Oman trial launched 2019. Qatar trial on air launched July 2019, 10 DAB+ service on air. Jordan 5 DAB+ service on air since 2017. Now regarding the radio receiver for the Arab region, the technical committee of ASBU put forward the specification of the DAB+ receivers and approved it from 2018. ASBU recommends the members to apply this specification from 2020. The specifications, which is approved by ASBU, meet as much as possible the European requirements that respond to standard HC-TS 103.461 and HC-TS 103.176. But with the three important expectations where all the receivers should have the criteria to use the Arabic text, provide an AM reception, provide an FM reception. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adnan. That's a very good progress in the Arab region. It's really moving forward at great speed now. So fantastic to hear that. Thank you very much for that. Now to move on to Patrick Hannon, who's president of WorldDAB, and he will give us the global status of DAB from as of today. Thank you. Over to you, please, Patrick.
Thank you, Les. My screen is not sharing properly. Can you see anything?
Sorry, nothing is black.
I think you're at the end of your slides, Patrick, so maybe click exit and then go to the front.
Yeah. Okay, is that showing now?
That is, yes, just need to go full screen.
Yeah. It's when the going full screen is, that's where we're having the problem. Okay. I'll do it not full screen. Okay. Okay, can you see that okay?
It's not too bad.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because for full screen, it's not working. Okay, Les, Dr. Adnan, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Basically, I'm going to give an overview of the developments of DAB+, and also this will really be an outline for what we're going to be covering in the webinar over the next 3 days. So really what we're here to do today is to share our experiences of DAB+. And so three things we want to cover. Number one, the global status of DAB+. Number two, the technology and its benefits. And number three, how do you launch successfully? So the first key message is that DAB+ is emerging as a global standard for radio. We know that it's very strong in Europe, as you can see from that top left-hand corner, but we now have services, as we've just heard, across the Arab region in North Africa and in the Middle East and the Gulf states and in Turkey. We also have trial services on air in South Africa and also activity in Australia, who've been on air since 2009. And in the Asia-Pac region, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So very much a global picture. So if we return to Europe, I think the most important message is that it's clear that DAB+ is established as a core future platform for radio in Europe. It started in UK, Norway, Denmark, and Switzerland, the original 4 countries going back about 20 years. But then things really started to change in 2011 when Germany launched, and then they were followed by the Netherlands and Italy, and we've since had Belgium and Slovenia and Austria. And you can see those dark colors there in the middle, really providing a backbone of DAB+ through the heart of Europe. And now we've got expansion both to the west with France and to the east, Sweden, Poland, Czech, and trials taking place in other Eastern European countries. So how are we doing? Well, the key message is we're making strong progress in major markets. And just to give you some headlines, UK, 58% of listening is digital. Germany launched back in 2011. This year in October, they're due to launch their second national multiplex. Italy have passed legislation that from January of this year requires all receivers, both automotive and consumer, to have DAB+. And Australia, which obviously is an enormous territory, started with five cities, expanded to a further 3 cities in 2019. So it's a story of progress, and it's a story of new launches. So just in the last 2 years, we've had launches in Belgium, Austria, and Sweden. And next year, we have France launching national DAB+, and clearly France is an extremely important country in Europe, but also for its relationships with North African countries. So they already have 8 cities on air, but they'll be launching a national multiplex, in fact 2 national multiplexes next summer. That would have been this year, but that had to be postponed due to COVID. And the most advanced countries have now got to the stage where they're able to actually switch off their FM transmissions. Norway switched off, as you may know, in 2017, and they're going to be followed, the plan is that they will be followed by Switzerland, who are planning to switch off between 2022 and 2023. So that really is what success looks like. Now, one of the key issues that people often consider when they're launching DAB+ is, well, what about receivers? And in particular, what about cars? The good news is that the picture on cars has changed dramatically over the last, I'd say over the last 7 years. And you see in the top row there that in Norway, Switzerland, UK, Italy, Australia, almost all new cars come with DAB+ as standard. And in other markets such as Belgium, France, Netherlands, and Germany, again, you can see a majority of new cars coming with DAB+ as standard. So it's, I think, key point, it's technically possible and it's happening to get DAB+ in cars. But it's going to become, it's even better than that. So the European Union is now actively supporting digital radio. In 2018, they passed a directive that will require all new car radios sold within the EU to be able to receive digital terrestrial radio. And that directive comes into force at the end of this year. So from 2021 onwards, all new car radios sold within the EU should have digital terrestrial radio. In practice, that means DAB+. So it's a complete game changer for the future of DAB. So those are the headline developments, but what's driving these changes? Well, the very simple message is that FM spectrum is full, and that means there's no capacity to expand, and it's impossible to innovate. And that's a serious issue because the world is changing, and in particular, we know that we have competition from the digital giants, whether that's Amazon, Apple, Google with YouTube, or Spotify. They are all competing for the attention of radio's listeners. So it's essential that radio optimizes the broadcast experience. And I say the broadcast experience because radio needs to play to its core strengths. And those core strengths are it's free to air, there's no third-party gatekeeper, and critically, it's reliable in emergencies. So absolutely essential to optimize broadcast. And that's where DAB+ comes in. So the first key benefit is the extra choice that DAB+ offers. Now it's going to vary from country to country, but as you can see from this chart, you can get up to 6 times as many national services on DAB+ as you get on FM. And just to emphasize that listeners really love these new services. So this is an example from the UK. In the UK, 17 million people listen each week to digital-only services. And to give you a sense of perspective, that's over 1/3 of all adults in the UK are listening to these digital-only services. The second key benefit is clearer sound. And this is particularly relevant in countries where FM is overcrowded, particularly if you've got a number of countries whose border, a lot of countries which are closer together, so there's a risk of interference. DAB+ gets around that problem. It's a much clearer audio, much better experience for listeners. And then the third benefit is really to do with the visualization of radio. So particularly in cars, we have these screens which are getting ever larger, and DAB+ allows stations to display visuals. That could be a station logo, it could be album artwork, it could be pictures of the artist, whatever. The point is that you can get a clear and simple visual display which will augment the radio experience. And then we move on to the economics. So I won't go into lots of detail, but probably the key thing on the cost side is that the cost of distributing a single service on DAB+ is about 1/10 of the cost of distribution on FM. And the reason for that is that you have 10, maybe even 15 services on a single multiplex, on a single frequency. So they all share the cost. So it's a much more cost-effective way of distributing radio than FM. And then we have the upside on the revenues. So I said that the importance for radio, it's all about innovation. So one of the classic examples is Absolute Radio in the UK. So Absolute Radio was a pretty standard rock station. It wasn't the market leader. It's quite well known, but it was definitely in the second tier of stations. But they came up with the very simple idea, really, of launching stations based on different decades. And so we have Absolute 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, and classic rock. So you might think, well, that sounds great. Well, I'll tell you, it is great because they've tripled their audience in 7 years. So there's been no negative effect on the core station, but these new stations have all delivered extra audiences. And of course, extra audiences leads to extra revenues. So this is for the whole of the UK commercial radio sector over the last 5 years, so from 2013 to 2018. And you can see in a time when the world is becoming increasingly online, radio has actually grown its revenues by 33%. And it's the national DAB stations, the national commercial stations, that have really driven that success. So talking of success, how do we ensure that we achieve it? So I only have one slide on this, but it's a really, really important slide. And it's called the 5 C's, as you'll see on the right-hand side. Basically what we've done is to look at what are the key components of the radio ecosystem that need to be in place to make sure that you can deliver a successful launch. And the 5 C's are coverage, content, consumer devices, cars, and communication. So very briefly, coverage. Clearly, if you want your platform to be successful, you need to cover the major population areas. Ideally, if possible, you're also covering the major road networks. Secondly, content. Essential that you have a content proposition that is superior to what is available on FM. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it, of offering DAB+. Number 3, you need to make sure that consumer devices are available, and they need to be available at a range of price points. The good news is that the entry-level price of consumer DAB receivers is now about $25. So absolutely affordable. And of course, you can spend a lot more if you want to get the more feature-rich devices. Cars, as we've heard, it is now commonplace for cars to have DAB+. The key thing is to make sure that the manufacturers and the importers in your country know what the situation is and are encouraged and are enthusiastic about putting DAB+ in as standard. And then finally, we have communication, and this is really about talking to consumers, but also other stakeholders that are relevant to the radio ecosystem. And I'm thinking here, well, car manufacturers that I've mentioned, but also retailers who will be selling consumer radios. You've got to make sure that everybody is working together and it is clear about what is happening. And right at the bottom, and also at the top, we have this magic word, collaboration. So the key to success is collaboration. And that means collaborating both with your competitors and also with people who are active in other industries or other sectors that are part of the ecosystem. And again, I come back to cars. You've got to have, as broadcasters, you must develop a close relationship with the car manufacturers to make sure that you're working together to deliver the proposition to the consumer. So finally, to conclude, 3 key messages, 3 key takeaways. Number 1, DAB+ delivers benefits for broadcasters and listeners. We've heard about the extra choice, the better sound quality, the visuals. Essentially, it's about making sure that broadcasters are able to innovate in the digital age. Number 2, the receiver market is fully developed. And if we'd been having this conversation 10 years ago, it would have been a very different message. But today, cars have DAB+ as standard, and in-home receivers are very much affordable. And finally, collaboration across the radio ecosystem is the key to success. If you don't work together, it'll be very difficult to succeed. So make sure, reach out to other players in your market, other broadcasters, the other stakeholders. Working together, you can build a successful platform. Thank you very much. And I'll now hand back to Les.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That's great. It's very good to hear the good news and the fact that, particularly on the receiver side, we're now seeing just such a great range, and we'll talk more about that over the course of this webinar series. So good progress all round. So I will now move on to my presentation, and I will talk about DAB system features. So we'll talk about DAB+ broadcast features, a quick receiver overview, and a little bit about hybrid radio, which is the next generation that's coming. So the first thing is, we all know it's digital. We have to move on. It's a very digital world, and the old analog world, well, it served its purpose, and it's time to move on with the rest of humanity. So let's just look at what we've got, a feature overview. The The first thing is that DAB is delivered in a different way to analog radio. And Patrick touched on this. The fact is that we use a multiplex system where we have multiple different audio services delivered on the same transmission. Now, typically we say about 18 services on DAB Plus at 64 kilobits each. However, there's certainly ensembles around the world, multiplexes around the world, and in this country, Australia, myself, which are upward of 24. In fact, I know of one in Adelaide that has 27. So the good news is that the audio bit rate for each of the services provided on that multiplex can be adjusted to provide the appropriate quality for the audio material type. So if you've got classical music, you might have a higher bit rate than if you have pop or rock music, for example. Digital radio provides program associated data. That's a standard feature to provide text. All radio receivers have text, and increasingly today in home receivers also have slideshow images. And certainly in cars, we now see just about all new cars have reasonably large and often high definition screens. And they can show a whole variety of information I'll talk about in a minute. We have a number of advanced features for things like announcements and emergency warnings, and also data services for things like TPEG traffic or journal line text services. But the most important thing is the room for a lot more stations. DAB is a spectrally efficient and robust transmission system. We have to remember we have to have both for radio, because radio needs to operate in a mobile environment. If we look at this example from pre-DAB days in Australia, we can see the number of AM and FM services available. If we move on to the next slide, we see that's the number available today. And for example, in Sydney, we've gone from about 25 commercial, public service and wide area community stations to today there are 61. That number goes up and down. It was up to 64 at one stage. It goes up and down as new services are launched or broadcasters decide to change the direction that their broadcasts are going in. And what that means is it gives more variety to the audience and gives the broadcaster a lot more flexibility in the type of information they can deliver. And here's an example of what Patrick was talking about. Brand extension. It's so important in terms of the commercial context. In the UK, in Heart has a Heart Extra, one more. You can do different content to its baseline. NRK in Norway has P1 Plus. The BBC in the UK has basically doubled its number of services. And that's a typical situation here in Australia. Again, a very big brand extension strategy to provide a range of different music genres under the guidance of the core FM service, which is also, of course, simulcast on DAB. So just as an example, in the rock category, we have Triple M. That's the FM station, but it's supported by 5 additional subgenres. And that helps gather more listeners and keep more listeners, which is all so important today in face of the digital giants that Patrick talked about. It also offers the ability to have pop-up stations. And these are very, very handy in under a range of different situations. For example, Elf Radio, that's a Christmas station. We have Main Stage, which is used when major international artists tour the country. Unfortunately, that's not available right now, but hopefully next year. We see other examples here of the Olympics, for example, BBC Radio. And I think importantly, in times of emergency, you can have pop-up stations like the Queensland floods a few years back. A station was established just for that situation. Now, analog radio, it's all built about numbers. Digital radio is all built around text and labels. And we can see some examples here. We don't have to go to whatever Nova 969, I suppose, but that's okay. It's got the number in the name. But now we've got logos to go with that. Pure Gold 80s, chill. You get an immediate sense of what that station is going to provide. So it's used very much for choosing stations. It makes life a lot easier. And that's especially important when we find that we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times as many services to choose from. So we have to make it easier for the listener. We have dynamic label, which is text, where we can deliver short but straightforward and effective messages to listeners. Things like album art, sorry, not album art, things like now playing, weather information, all sorts of information, up to the broadcaster to determine exactly what they would like to do. And the same goes with slideshow images. Some examples here, we have the now playing type of information, weather reports for different cities, images of the talent presenting the programs, advertising materials, sports results. It's up to exactly what the broadcaster wants to do to deliver this type of information. I could really up the ante on this to provide a very multimedia style service. And this is really now supported by the receiver manufacturers, both in domestic and in automotive, where we see that the colour screen availability is increasing rapidly at the moment. We have data services. And I think the big example here is traffic and TPEG, which is carried as a data service. And that carries what you'd expect to see. It's traffic flows, it's congestion, it's fuel locations and prices, it's car parking availability. Now, the important thing to note here that this is not a one-to-one service. This is a one-to-many service. So it's extremely cost-effective to be able to deliver this service over, for example, a 16 kilobit digital channel. Very effective. And we have other services like this. We've got the Journal Line service, which gives things like news and sports and local weather, and it's categorized. It's basically a categorized data service that you can go and look up the latest information. And one other thing here with data services, the way the standards are built, custom applications can also be created. Let's move on to advanced features. Service and program information. In this case, we can deliver the logos and strap lines and information like website links, social media links over the air, or as I'll talk about in hybrid, over hybrid as well. Of course, program schedules are also available. Now, really importantly, the DAB system is built with what's called an announcement system, and that can be used in the more traditional way, like traffic services, where TMC would allow the receiver to move from the current listen service to a traffic announcement, say every half an hour. On the hour or half an hour, there'll be a 5-minute bulletin about traffic in your city or your region. And of course, DAB can do exactly that, but it can do it for a whole load of other things, whether it's news or whether it's sports. You can have that, what we call vectoring, from your main station to a support station just for bulletin type of information. Now, this system has also been built for emergency warnings. And that emergency warning system, of course, has to be used judiciously and only when absolutely needed. But there are times when it is needed. And that system can force your radio, your receiver, to go to a specific service where the important emergency information is provided. Now, I don't think we can see a better example of how useful that would be than the bushfires, the wildfires in Western USA at the moment. Certainly Australia, we had the same thing last year. And this is really a service that can make a big difference. And another advanced feature we have is service following. And this is really a convenience for listeners. So when they move from one area to another area, if the service they're listening to is available in that new area on a new multiplex, then the radio can automatically switch to that so you don't lose the service you love to listen to. There we go. Receivers, now mass market. Over 80 million sold. And a little example here, we say prices from $15 US. Here's an example from Australia earlier this year, DAB digital radio, 24 Australian dollars. That's about 12 pounds UK. So that's amazing. It's price is not a barrier anymore. And in fact, we can see the cost difference here between AM, FM and digital, which includes FM, $5. It's a small percentage these days. So this is great news. Same in cars. We'll see this, I'm sure, many more times where we have the vast majority of manufacturers include DAB radio. And most of those are now being standard factory fit, not options. Now, a little bit on hybrid radio. Pardon me. Hybrid is really the next step in radio evolution. It combines all the benefits of digital broadcasting and one-to-many and cost-effective broadcasting with the ability to deliver digital information over IP. It joins the broadcast and the IP world. And that can be used for logos and program information. It can be used for interactivity, for metrics and analytics. Even alternative content is coming. So it's high quality, it's rapid delivery, and you can even do IP service following, which means you can switch to an IP source for your current service when you might go deep underground into a car park, for example, or might go outside the boundary area. So it's a very cost-effective way of delivering advanced features, but still maintaining the very cost-effective main distribution of audio over digital broadcast. And that really does apply to vehicles in particular. With those nice screens, custom screens, what we're seeing is hybrid radio is now being built into brands, into Audi, VW, Porsche and BMW. It's almost becoming standard. And there's a number of other brands which are actively pursuing integrating hybrid radio into their vehicles right now. So in a summary, DAB digital radio provides us a wide range of advantages over traditional analog. It's definitely more spectrally efficient, allows significantly more services in any area, very high audio quality, and with the ability of broadcasters to optimize that quality and to trade off bit rate versus the number of services in the capacity they have. We have PAD, program associated data, for additional information in the form of text and slideshow. Those advanced features including emergency warning system, data services for traffic and hybrid capabilities are advancing. And most importantly, again, receivers are widely available at affordable costs with a wide range of features and styles. So with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and we'll now move on. I think we have one question for Q&A. In this short Q&A, and this is from Hugo Gaderis, and it's addressed to me, and it says, Hugo asks, any idea in what extent the basic and advanced features are implemented in the receivers on the market? I'm thinking about service following support of PNG, APNG slideshows, schedule slides, etc. Well, advanced features are gradually being implemented more in domestic radios, but probably more implemented in automotive products. And definitely the slideshow capabilities, standard is JPEG, PNG and APNG. So that is really now being taken up in a very strong way by the automotive manufacturers and the infotainment system manufacturers. So I think more and more we are going to see multimedia radios rather than just straight audio and a bit of text. And we're going to hear a fair bit about that on Thursday when we have a whole session on receivers. Thank you for your question, Hugo. It's a good question. Okay, I think we only had a very short Q&A time and it's in fact up now. So I'm going to move forward and move on to establishing the DAB Plus market. And with Catherine Sable-Brown from Technologies to tell us a bit about how that is done in across the world, best practice. So over to you, Kat. Can you please share your screen?
I'll try and put it full screen. There we go. Can everyone see that? Thank you for the opportunity, ASBU and WorldDAB, to present to this webinar. I'm hoping here to share with you some tips and some tricks for establishing the DAB Plus market. And whilst every country is different, there are some common stakeholders and some common ingredients to success in establishing the DAB Plus market. Patrick alluded to them in his 5 C's slide earlier. And they are the broadcasters, obviously it starts with the broadcasters, and the regulators or the licensing bodies, the automotive industry, the receiver manufacturers and the retailers. So looking first at the broadcasters, what we find is that the technical people often lead this debate. They often understand DAB and they understand the benefits, but they need to help the rest of the business, the rest of the broadcast organization, see where DAB Plus sits and fits alongside their existing platforms, the things they do with their websites, their apps, their social media, their podcasts, even their events and activations. And a lot of people say, is it AM or FM? Will it not take away from my AM and FM audience? And I think Patrick showed very clearly that it actually boosts audience quite significantly by adding new and niche formats. So if the technical people can start by engaging management, program makers, sales and promotion teams, and sharing with them the fact that DAB Plus is very cost effective, it's very reliable, as we've seen, as a new platform that can sit alongside all the other digital activities and events and help those broadcasters actually maintain audience share at this time when we are significantly under threat by attracting new audiences, offering new content, new ways to engage, allowing listeners to share a radio experience wherever and however it is that suits them. For the salespeople and the management in commercial operations, there are new revenue streams to be had. We know here in Australia that people are explaining a 10% revenue boost by advertisers taking the main station, but also some of the brand extension stations. And so combining these platforms creates a successful and thriving radio industry, and that's what we're here to do. In fact, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in their latest entertainment and media outlook for the Australian media, said that the resilient radio industry will find growth over the forecast period via new products and distribution channels such as podcast, streaming, on demand and DAB+. So they're seeing those things all sit together. It's not one or the other, it's all of them aligning. And as Patrick mentioned, it's the broadcaster, it's not the broadcaster on the other side of town that's your competitor anymore. It is the big Google giants, the big Facebooks and Amazons, the Apple Musics, and so on. These are offering audio to us on all these different types of devices, which are actually taking the place in some people's bedrooms or kitchens or lounge rooms. These clever devices, which are voice activated or Spotify connected or Sonos connected, they are really compelling to consumer audiences. But at the same time, they have actually generated some consumer concern about the privacy. Are they always listening to our conversations in the home? And so Pure, who was a very pure play DAB radio, used to make clock radios and car adapters and that sort of thing. They brought out their smart radio, and you can pop down the top and disconnect that listening thing to ensure that your privacy is there. And the DAB Plus chip will continue to work. So you can still enjoy music from radio in your home, having one of these funky connected devices, but without worrying about privacy issues. So once the broadcasters have decided that they're going to adopt the most mature of the digital radio standards, DAB+, they need to start thinking about what they would want to say to the regulators and the licensing bodies. And that means that collaboration, that discussion between the major players in the broadcasting industry, that would be the government players, the big commercial players, and the licensed community broadcasters. Not every broadcaster, not the ones that are unlicensed, but the big ones that have the ability to motivate listeners to move across and start to listen both AM, FM, and DAB. And we need to think about what we might ask the regulator for, because often we find that the regulator will say, well, I'm waiting on the broadcaster to tell me what they want. And the broadcasters say, well, I don't want to move forward because the regulator hasn't told me what they're expecting from digital radio. And here's the tip. Regulators will generally not choose a particular platform for digital. They will rely on the broadcasters to choose that themselves. So there's no point in going to the licensees and saying, we haven't made a decision. You've got to make a decision, and then you've got to go forward with a plan. And you've got to identify the spectrum that is available within the 174 to 240 megahertz band, and decide how much of that spectrum you want quarantined. So even if you're not going to roll out DAB for the next year or two, at least the telcos won't get their hands on it. It will be quarantined for you. Then you want some proper licensing policy around things like free spectrum for the incumbent broadcasters, for example, so that there is an incentive or a carrot for those big broadcasters to go forward and invest to build the DAB Plus platform. We wanted in Australia, we had a no new entrants platform, so that there was a period while we were establishing the DAB Plus platform and also carrying the cost of AM and FM, where we didn't have any new entrants to compete with us. And we also had no format restrictions, so that the broadcasters could play around and work out what formats and what content was going to work for their listeners. So those are just some of the tips, but WorldDAB will have a mass of other information on regulatory frameworks that you can approach WorldDAB to share. Then, as Patrick said, absolutely essential to get the automotive industry on board. And as Les showed, all of these brands already support DAB+, and you can see that these are the people that you need to write to. So I've put this slide in for a second time because this is the list. And you need to write to the CEO in each one of these, and you need to share with them your plans, where you're going to cover, when you're going to start, what new content, We ran workshops for these people, and we took them out in the car and showed them AM and FM. We helped them get road tests and road plans so that they could test their own implementations using our signal off air. So there's loads of things that you can do to get people involved. When we started in Australia, we had this as our competition, a USB and an iPod. That was the only difference to AM, FM and DAB in the receiver. And so we went to the car industry and we also said, can we have some adapters, please, so that we can make our existing 16 million radios in car adapted so they can also get DAB+. And we were very happy to have these sorts of products come through. And then we had these factory fitted or aftermarket products that gave us the ability to search from an A to Z list. And we got massive support from the automotive and the receiver manufacturing industry. But the world has changed, and this is the dash of the future. And we need, as broadcasters, to step up and fill that dash with really compelling content. And our connected vehicles are already here. They're already in our markets. And broadcasters must show why we need to retain radio's place in the dash. We need to show them how important radio is. It's more resilient than IP. If you simply rely on IP in that 20-kilometre tailback of traffic when the bushfires were on in Sydney, nobody would have had any connectivity or known what was going on. It was only the broadcast radio that worked because the cells were overloaded. So, but we will promise the car industry that we can make radio look better. We've got all the metadata Les just talked about. We must ensure that all our broadcasters in trial mode or in full deployment mode are delivering images and text. We must deliver those links that we talked about earlier so that listeners can engage with our content live, they can vote, they can tag content, they can really get engaged with broadcast. We have all this content, we just need to build the DAB+ platform so that we can actually use it. And getting back to what we were saying before, broadcasters are not just broadcasting anymore. They're engaging with things like SoundCloud or doing events. They're doing podcasts. And DAB helps us better than AM and FM can to integrate all that on-demand or time-shifted programming, like streaming, like podcasts. So listeners get what they want, but they get it from radio. They don't just get it from any old audio source from around the world. So, and it's up to them then how they choose. We don't care whether they choose to listen on a DAB or on their app, or they tweet or they vote, so long as they continue to being engaged with radio. And then we go to our receiver manufacturers and our retailers. And I categorize this, and what I did when we started here was I just got lists of the department and chain stores, and I got our receptionist to build a list for me of, you know, who the CEOs were and who the specialist retailers were, the people that supplied the home audio and the automotive aftermarket installers, the head office of the discount department stores, who will probably range the cheap end of the market, but they will also go and make their own, what I call vanilla branded radios. So they can really help drive the price down and get some cheap pricing. And then there's the online retailers like Amazon and Kogan and Alibaba and so on. So we needed to have lists. We needed to get these people engaged in the rollout of DAB, tell them what was going to be on air, what we were going to do, where it was going to be available, and get their support for receivers. We had to work with the chip makers, and I know Patrick's here today, and we'll have Prem from Frontier on Thursday talking about what the chip makers are doing to support smart technologies and DAB together. But keep a monitor on what all these guys are doing, because they're very innovative. Talk to the chip makers about the sorts of functionality you want. Prem will go into that on Thursday about what sort of things they're bringing out to the market. But if it's Arabic characters or something, then we need to explain that to the manufacturers and the chip makers to make sure that those features are supported. Same with the Thai characters. And encourage these manufacturers in your market. They're very, very keen to build a market. So WorldDAB can assist you to get to know these people, to put you in contact with these people, make sure that you talk to them so that there are receivers available. And they all have merchandisers that get out into stores. So make sure that they're also helping the people who are selling in store to know and understand what you're offering. You can also do intranet training for them and all sorts of other things, and encourage these manufacturers to support the advanced features. If you as broadcasters are sending out these advanced features like slides, it would be really good to have some feature-rich receivers. And finally, as more countries roll out, there's better chance of getting DAB into handsets. It's something that WorldDAB has been very passionate about. So you've got a single click through on that URL that we're broadcasting. This is a big holy grail for us to get it into these devices. And finally, never stop building the awareness in your market. WorldDAB has a magnificent page on their website of all the different countries and what they're doing in terms of marketing their DAB. So there's plenty of experience that you can share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kath. That's a really interesting presentation, and I think while it highlights there's a lot of different facets to rolling out DAB, it's not insurmountable by any means, and there's lots of lessons that have been learned by lots of broadcasters and regulators around the world, and that's one of the things that WorldDAB is here to help you with. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Lindsay Cornell. He's a Principal Systems Architect at BBC Design and Engineering. And Lindsay will talk to us about the latest from the Technical Committee and standards. So over to you, please, Lindsay.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of the activities that have been going on in the Technical Committee within WorldDAB, which I chair. Primarily what I'm going to be talking about is the work that we've done on standards. If I can make the presentation work. Excellent, yes. So I'm going to talk about receivers mainly, about receiver standards, testing them, the sort of minimum requirements that people often want to set up. Where I'm going to talk about Arabic script, because this is part of the ASBU Academy presentation. And I'm also going to talk briefly about the EEC directive and automotive DAB receivers. So as we've heard already, there are more than 500 different models of DAB plus radios available in lots of different form factors: domestic radios, automotive, specialist devices. The question that people often ask is, are these radios that I've seen when I've been traveling overseas, are these going to meet the requirements that I have in the market in which I'm operating myself? And this question is not a new question. This question has been around for a while. And there is an ETSI specification which was developed by WorldDAB and which basically sets out the minimum requirements, the test specifications for both domestic and automotive DAB receivers. And this specification was a development of the work that was originally done in the UK to do with digital switchover. with a so-called tick mark scheme, which was some branding that could be put onto products which would meet the requirements. So this specification includes all the things that you need really for the core of the DAB receiver. So it has requirements and test methods for the RF performance, where it tunes how sensitive it should be, how it should deal with interference and so on. The audio decoding modes, reconfiguration of the multiplex. There are several services you may wish to change that around. The receiver needs to be able to deal with that. Importantly also, the text display requirements. We heard a little bit already about dynamic label, about metadata, about labeling of services. And also for the automotive receivers, the receiver itself is moving around, so therefore it's seeing different signals in different areas. How does it deal with that? So that's the service following and also the announcements. And an updated version has just been published. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. This ETSI specification is now three years old. So what's the geographical coverage of this standard? Well, as I said, the specification was developed from the UK only standard, and the reason being to allow more countries to benefit from the same standard, and to allow a larger market. So larger market, lower cost devices effectively, but all having the same level of features and performance. So when the ETSI specification was developed, it was extended from the 7 channels, which at that time were the ones used in the UK, to all of the channels, all 38 channels across the whole of band 3, from 174 to 240 megahertz. And the display requirements, which previously only covered the English language, were extended to cover all the Latin-based languages used in Europe. So in other markets outside of Europe, you can still use this standard as the core of the receiver requirements, because the DAB standard is the same across the globe. It tunes to the same channels, the coding and modulation the same, the audio coding is the same. So all of that sort of core, basic, essential functionality is all specified in this standard. But different markets use different languages, and so the display requirements are likely to be different in different parts of the world. And it's also possible that other regions of the world use additional radio standards, and those might also be very important and need to be incorporated within the requirements for that particular market. So regarding the display, so this is critically the thing that changes between markets, and there are 2 types of text labels used in DAB. We have service information labels. Those are the ones that allow you to select the radio station by name, not worry about the numbers, and the dynamic labels that provide extra information to the audio. And commonly on domestic radio, that's text that scrolls past on a small window because the display can't display the entire label. But when we come to other markets, we have other features to do with script. And one of the issues that's in a way been an issue that we have now addressed is that analog radios don't have a text display. So radio manufacturers haven't really been used to the idea of what's required to support that. Of course, digital radios do, and they've been manufactured now for quite a long time. But until recently, receiver manufacturers were only used to dealing with left to right scripts. But there are languages written in right to left scripts, and of course, Arabic is one of those. There are scripts where the characters change shape according to where they are in the word, and Arabic is also a language where that's the case. And there are scripts where the characters actually move position depending on which other characters are surrounding them. And Thai is a language where that's the case. So dealing with different scripts, dealing with right to left scripts rather than left to right requires more capability than simply swapping left and right over, which in a very simplistic way, you might think that changing between a left to right and a right to left script involves. So the DAB standard is able to deliver all the Unicode characters in what's called the basic multilingual plane. What that means is all the written scripts that we have in the world. But because that is such a huge range of characters, different types of rendering possible, it's hard for the broadcasters and the manufacturers to come up with the formula whereby both of them are doing the same thing. The more characters that get put into the receiver, the potentially more expensive the receiver will be. So in order to make this easier, in order to align much better between the broadcast and the manufacturing markets, the standards include additional support. And it's made up of two features, basically. The signaling feature, which is called the text control feature, and that helps the receiver to know if it will be able to handle the label, and if it can't, it can take mitigating action. And the second part are the regional profiles, and these detail which code points, so which characters, which script features are needed for a particular market. So these regional profiles define what will be transmitted by the broadcaster, so they put limits on what the broadcaster can transmit in terms of the complexity and the character ranges. But in turn, that means that the manufacturers know what capabilities they need to provide in their receiver in order to meet the requirements of the broadcasters in those markets. And we so far just defined 4 profiles. The first one, EBU Latin, is not really a regional profile, because in fact it could be used in various different parts of the world. But it's sort of the base profile. The assumption that we've made is that everybody is going to need to include Latin somehow or another in their regional profile. We then have one called the All Europe profile, because Europe also has Greek and Cyrillic scripts used in the languages of Europe, and I'll come on to that. I'll touch that again later. We have the ASBU profile, which includes Arabic, and we have the Thai profile, which is Thai along with Latin. And as future markets develop and different areas of the world embrace DAB, further profiles, regional profiles, can be defined, and we will add those then to the DAB standards as required. So I mentioned that the ETSI specification had been recently updated. That was work that we did this year in the technical committee. And in fact, after our full review, there were really only a small number of changes that were made. And most of that was to do with the display characteristics and the introduction of these regional profiles and so on. So within the requirements part of the document, we now mention within the standard that there are other markets that will need additional capabilities to support the regional profiles. So we've put within this specification a link to the regional profiles to allow, when receiver specifications are defined, to allow that expansion. And there is one specific extension which is included in the document, and that's because it is an ETSI standard, and ETSI works under mandates from the European Commission. And there is a Commission mandate directive, the EECC, the European Electronic Communications Code. Mainly it's to do with IP services, but specifically it mentions interoperability for broadcast services, and in terms of radio, it specifies that for new cars sold in the European Union, they need to have a digital radio. And because that means they need to support all the languages of the European member states, that means that the All Europe profile, the Latin, Greek and Cyrillic profile, car receivers installed in new cars will need to meet that requirement. The other thing that's added is support for alarm announcements, the emergency warnings, that's now included in the requirements and tested for as well. So just finally, some thoughts on your producing receiver specifications for other markets. As I said, this ETSI specification covers all the core DAB features and performance requirements. Now, you might think that copying and pasting these requirements into a local standard is a good idea, but actually that causes some problems for manufacturers, because they will need to do a check between what's in the ETSI standard, which they're using already for whichever markets they're already supplying, and your market. So they'll have to do some work to cross-check, make sure everything's okay. Maybe it's possible that something is missed, something is not copied quite correctly. Then that will raise questions of what they can do. So making a reference to the ETSI standard is a clean and simple solution. And in fact, that's what the ASBU has done in terms of its digital radio specification. Now, markets outside of Europe will also need different requirements for the text. And so with this link in with the regional profiles, it's quite straightforward then to extend the requirements of the display by referencing to the relevant regional profiles. All the manufacturers know what a regional profile is, and they know therefore what that specification would mean. And lastly, there are perhaps other radio standards also operating in different markets. So the ETSI specification only requires an FM decoder, and with RDS for automotive receivers, it doesn't put any performance requirements on the FM receiver. That was outside of the scope. So if you do need performance requirements, or indeed you need medium wave, for example, that will also need to be specified in addition to referencing to this ETSI specification. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you, the developments in the capability of receivers for testing and for specification. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll pass back on to Les for the final presentation of this session.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's very good to know what's been going on and where things are going, because I think that's good guidance for new countries and areas and how to handle introduction of new standards. We'll now move on to technical business case for DAB+, which is myself. We're just running against time slightly, so I might go a little bit quick. I'll talk about radio distribution costs and the use of 5G technologies in this particular technical business case discussion. So there's several technologies available for delivering radio program content. There have been many studies on cost efficiency and broadcast versus other technologies, and these have been published quite widely by a number of different organisations and universities and so forth. And most focus on the technical cost of operating and distribution systems. But I think we all have to remember there is a bit of a duty of care for broadcasters, and particularly public service broadcasters, to be able to reach listeners in the most compromised positions. And this is particularly in the rural and remote areas I'm talking about. It's easy to do it in cities, to do other methods, but when it comes down to having robust communications in difficult times, broadcast is always the last man standing. So let's look at some of the distribution cost analysis we've seen in the past. The one that's been used quite frequently over the last few years is the Gates Air analysis. And this comes from the ASBU workshop last year we did in Kuala Lumpur. And in this particular case, I'm just noticing FM to DAB, the CapEx cost estimation was for 18 services versus 1 was over 10 times. FM cost more than 10 times. But more than significantly, the operating cost, just for power and cooling, their estimate was that FM would cost 42 times more than DAB Plus in particular. And that's excluding floor space, antenna space, and aperture and maintenance, all of which will be more for 18 transmitters than 1. So I thought, that's a big number. I better have a closer look at that. So I did a check myself. And it turns out that my estimate is to get the same coverage in a radius of around 30 to 40 kilometres with about 10 kilowatts ERP. FM needs about 2 kilowatts, DAB needs 1. And that was based on the same size aperture for the antenna. So go through the numbers, and my estimate actually comes out at 20 times. So 2 times different, not that much compared with 20 or 40. So it's pretty clear. So let's look at some real world numbers. Let's look at the EBU analysis. And that also shows FM way out over 10 times more costly. It also shows that IP costs are also quite significant. So just one other reason why IP only is not the best way to deliver one-to-many content. Remember, IP content these days is delivered on a one-to-one basis. So the costs of serving can grow to be quite significant. The costs in 2017 were that to do, in the example country, EBU country, it would be over 4 times more expensive. And in fact, because of costs, the scaling on volume, the cost of delivering only 10% of radio over IP is about the same as 90% for DAB. So very significant numbers. Now, and that's not saying don't use IP by any means. That's saying IP has a place and should be used in the right place. IP should be used to deliver strong metadata, for example. So real world examples, well, NRK is a good one. I spoke to NRK. They replaced 2,000 FM transmitters with 1,050 to get full coverage of Norway, pretty well full coverage. There's a few mountainous bits here and there where it doesn't get. The operating costs of DAB and FM, they say, was approximately the same. However, there's 5 times more services, 5 times more national services in DAB than there was in FM. So effectively, it's a fifth of the cost. Now, within that, that's not just operating cost. We also have to factor in the CapEx, which in the operating model used in Norway is provided by a network provider, and the cost that's being charged for that transmission includes all of the new equipment. And that's all the transmitters, all the links, all the antenna systems, and that's a lot of equipment. So it's amortizing all of that equipment, and that amortization in normal commercial conditions is somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And antenna systems will last a lot longer than 7 years. Jumping back to IP, here is a map of the national broadband network reach in Australia and southeastern Australia as of a couple of weeks ago from the NBN. And we can see the purple dots don't cover the whole map by any means. What that means is to get IP in your home and in NBN high quality streaming only reaches the towns and the surrounding areas. The remote and regional areas we can see here are by no means covered. Okay, what about mobile? Well, the green shows that in 4G. That's pretty good, but we still have these areas here which have no coverage. There are main roads passing through parts of southeastern Australia with no mobile coverage. Now, okay, well, some might say, well, 5G is going to fix all that. Well, let's just have a look at 5G, because I think there's a bit of mythology going on. So 5G is basically an evolution of 4G. Sure, there's some pretty innovative new features that are coming out in 5G, but the biggest one, in fact, is the use of higher frequencies. And we'll see what that means in a moment. So let's see where we are with radio. So individual streaming in this graph of delay versus bit rate or throughput comes right in this bottom left-hand corner here. We're typically talking about 64, 128 kilobit type streams, 96 of that order, AAC plus coding. If we look at large amounts of streaming, we're pushing the actual capacity out to hundreds of megabits. That's the sort of delivery that's needed, with not particularly difficult delay situations. So that doesn't really matter in the actual delivery. It does, however, matter in studio links. We want to keep that delay down to a minimum, and typically less than 10 milliseconds, 4 or 5, probably acceptable in most situations. Whether it's an OB, an outside broadcast link to a studio, or it's a studio to transmitter link. So it fits in the game. It's in the game. The radio industry needs to have some of these new features from 5G to make sure that it can compete in the future. All good stuff. 5G is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. Okay. Where does it fit in the overall data rate versus density? We see that radio stream is in probably the lower density areas and the higher bit rate. So we're getting into enhanced mobile broadband. In fact, this green ellipse could probably be moved somewhat to the right in some situations as well. It fits in there. It certainly has a place and a role in 5G. And in fact, in terms of contribution, we see some pretty good new features coming. And I think the one that really stands out to me is the network slicing capability, which allows the telco to guarantee a certain quality of service for a certain stream. So this is really, really useful stuff for outside broadcast connections and for emergency studio transmitter links, where you want to guarantee your quality at all times. Now, you'll have to pay for that, of course. We'll get to that in a minute. So that's all good. One word of warning, though. While that's been defined, and it's actually a carryover from about release 16 in 3GPP, which is about 3 years ago, 2016 perhaps, it's only for the core network. It's not on the air interface. It's not on the new radio interface yet. It'll come. It'll get there. So beware of using that at this very moment, or planning to use it in a big way. Really have to talk to your telco to find out whereabouts they are in their rollout strategy, and probably more importantly, in their business models, because a lot of these business models are yet to be, seriously defined. And yet, without a business model and how much you can pay for it, it's hard to move forward. Distribution, on the other hand, is quite a different story. And I'm going to jump here because we're running out of a bit of time. So what we're going to do is look at RF path loss, excuse me, for frequency. And using the standard equations here, it's just a square law from distance from transmission. And we look down here for DAB 200 megahertz and a 10-kilometer path, which is not unusual in a coverage area in most cities or even regional and rural areas. It's a minimum 97 dB loss in that link. Okay, well, what about 900 megahertz? That's got a path loss for the same distance of 111 dB. It's 14 dB more. That's over 20 times more loss. What does that mean? That means your coverage area is a lot smaller. If we keep moving up and we go to 3.6 gigahertz, which is really the first stepping off point for 5G, we see that the path loss is now up to 124 dB. 124, that's 27 dB more. That's almost 1,000 times less signal power at your receiver. So that's going to have a very, very major impact on coverage. And if we go up to the very wide band frequencies, up in the 26, 39 gigahertz band, where we're going to get the very, very high enhanced mobile broadband, we're talking hundreds of megabits per second per link, path loss there will only support cell sizes of the order of half a kilometer if you're lucky. So we have to be a bit wary of the hype when we see that in actual fact, to get good coverage, and particularly in wide areas, rural and remote settings, we really have to use the sub-gigahertz bands. There's no real choice. You know, even using, sorry, too far. Even using IoT narrowband specification, it has a maximum of, on a single link, of around 10 kilometers. So we really have to be very careful to protect these lower frequencies for broadcasting. Now, the recent WARC radio conference didn't discuss sub 700 megahertz bands. That was out of bounds. But what we do know is that it will be discussed, 450 to 700 will be discussed in the next radio conference in 2023. So what does that mean? That means that terrestrial TV in the UHF band is going to come under pressure for spectrum sharing, with mobile technologies trying to push into those lower frequencies for the exact reasons of better coverage. What does that say? It says VHF band 3 spectrum is really valuable. It says compression of UHTV and digital terrestrial TV might get pushed back into VHF. So if you wanted to establish DAB, I would say it would be a wise thing to get that spectrum locked down as soon as you can. Okay, just to conclude, DAB is the most cost-effective transmission system for radio, significant cost savings over FM, and I was very pleased to see Tunisia's plan to actually go for an analog switch off in only 5 years' time. That's fantastic. That is a really, really good initiative. 5G mobile technology will provide new contribution capabilities, which will be extremely beneficial to the efficiency of operation of radio businesses, and particularly for rich multimedia services, which will gradually be introduced over time, more and more. But it will not provide a complete solution for distribution, and particularly in wide areas, in rural and remote settings. The combination of 5G and IP, however, is a very good combination, because it gives you mission critical audio with cost-effective IP delivery of metadata when that IP is available. So broadcasters need to move to DAB to protect their businesses. We've heard that through the business case, commercial business cases. Also, the technical business case says the same. It says protect band 3, allocate band 3 to digital radio as soon as you can. WARC 23 is coming. It's going to be blood. So I'll just conclude here with hybrid and 5G is the most cost-effective delivery of multimedia radio. And thank everybody for listening. We're just 2 minutes over time. And I think I've got one Q&A question that I would like to ask Lindsay. I think it's appropriate to standards. And this is from Atef Haba. And he asks, Lindsay, DAB is supporting PAD for metadata. My question is, can we integrate animated logos and photos and a scrolling bar news, or can we just use static data? Could you
okay.
answer
So
that one?
yes, so animated logos, that is possible. In the slideshow specification, we document the use of animated PNG. So we also specify the way that a static slide would be displayed on devices that don't provide the animation. So you can identify a static image also to do that. In terms of scrolling news, well, most of the domestic receivers have the display of the dynamic label. and that is generally implemented as scrolling text because it's a small display. Alternatively, if you were to implement with photos, so you're talking about an image with text scrolling in front of it, generally speaking, that would probably, I mean, there's a couple of ways that could be done, but the sort of the low bitrate version would be to use the dynamic label and to have that displayed over the slide. Some receivers will do that. They provide different options to allow you to arrange the available metadata in different configurations on the screen. I think the thing that you always have to be aware of when using these kind of visualizations is that different radios will present differently depending on their capabilities. So some radios will only have the capability for the dynamic label, others will also have slideshow, and so on. And therefore, when you design your metadata, you need to take into account that each element really needs to work on its own, but also that there will be instances where it will be provided in combination. So in other words, you have to design your services, visual services, taking that into consideration.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's great. That's great. Okay. I'd just like now, I think it's time to close the session, remembering we have 2 more webinars in the next 2 days. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we'll have head-end systems with presentations from IZT and also transmission systems with a presentation from Gates Air. And then on the Thursday, we have another session which will go over network design and receivers in detail. So at this point, I'd just like to ask whether Patrick or Dr. Adnan, whether you would like to close our session today, please?
Yeah, just one thing I'd like to say, we've got a number of other questions that have come through, which I'm conscious that we haven't answered all of them. So if Bernie is on the line, will we be keeping a record of those questions and replying to, will we be able to answer them?
Yes, we will. We are recording all questions and we will send a response, compile a structured response to all questions.
I mean, certainly I can see, there's questions about, a comparison between DAB Plus and DRM. There's also a question from Comoros saying, how the WorldDAB project office and her job is to do, is really to support everybody around the world. I think, and that actually sort of leads me to a general message. Clearly, we're all here because we're passionate about radio and the future of radio and making sure that it's got a secure future. We all believe in the importance of radio. For many different reasons. Whether it's about expressing cultural values, democratic values, whatever values it might be, news and information, entertainment. Just a companion for people when they're on their own, and it's essential that we make that we make radio fit for purpose in the 21st century, and that's really what we're about. And because we all have that sort of shared belief, it really is a family approach. We've had speakers today from Australia. Are here to share information and to help people move forward. You've had a lot of success in Europe and Australia. Now we need to make serious advances in other parts of the world, and that's the purpose of today's seminar. that's it from me.
Dr. Adnan, would you like to have the last word?
No, Dr. Les, I don't have anything to add. Just to recommend our participants to use the Q&A instead of chat in order to be seen by everybody. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, all the panelists, for your great job today, and hopefully that was all enlightening and good information to all of those participating today. And thank you all for attending. We had over almost 150 participants today for most of the sessions. So I think that's a fantastic demonstration of the interest in moving digital radio, DAB plus digital radio forward around the world. So thank you. And I'll now say good night or good day in your part of the world.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.